everyone, great that you're joining us today. My name's Shona Pryor and I'm the Animal Health Manager at LIC. And today you've heard from Brendan and Ali about the management side of Yonis disease, and a big part of that is the testing and identifying those animals that have Yonis disease. So for the next 10 minutes or so, that's what I'm going to talk about. So I've shown here a bit of a stylized diagram of the Yonis timeline when you think about the long incubation period that this disease has. This is really important for actually identifying the best time to test for Yonis disease. So as you've heard, the critical time in an animal's life is when it's a calf. So that's 0 to 6 month age. That's when, if they're exposed to the Yonis bacteria, then they are likely to become infected. However, over the next 2 or 3 years, you won't actually know that cow is infected. So even past breeding age, right up to sort of those 3 or 4 year olds, that's because the bacteria actually likes to hide away in the gut of the animal, and the immune system of the cow doesn't actually recognize that it's there. So you won't see any antibody response until much later. So the line in blue reflects the bacterial shedding in the feces. So that's how much bacteria we could detect. And the red line indicates the antibody level towards that bacteria. And so as you'll see, before you even start seeing antibodies in either the blood or the milk, you actually will start to get some shedding in the feces. And so at this stage, these animals are still subclinical. They're actually looking fine. Those cows can look really, really healthy. There's nothing to indicate that there's actually anything wrong with them. But meanwhile, they're in the herd, they're shedding the bacteria everywhere and infecting the new calves coming through. So what we really want to do with testing is try and catch them before they get to that clinical stage, before they're starting to show those really obvious signs of Yonis disease. And so trying to test them early, so when they're calves, the test that we have now that's just not sensitive enough to be able to do so, because we just don't have enough bacteria in the feces or antibodies in the blood or milk. However, at the later stages, right when they start shedding, we start to see that sensitivity of the testing increase. And so that's where we focus our testing, is on those subclinical animals that are starting to shed bacteria in the feces. So in terms of the actual testing, we can look for the antibodies. So that's that cow's response to the bacteria being present. And we can do that either with blood samples or with herd test milk, which is really popular because that's obviously a very convenient way of testing. So regardless of whether you've got blood or milk, they actually all go through the same testing process, which is called an antibody ELISA. And what this is actually just the sample gets put onto a test plate, and it goes through a few hours in the lab of adding different reagents to it. And in the end, you get something that looks like this picture here, which shows a color change. So basically anything that's gone yellow has got the antibodies present, and anything that looks clear in those little wells, there's no antibodies. So that's how we determine whether an animal is positive or not for Yonis disease. The other option is to look just for the bacteria itself. So the best place to look for that, of course, is in the feces, because it's a gut bacteria. So historically, the main way of testing was using culture, so actually just plating up onto agar plates. But the bacteria actually takes a really long time to grow, so it can be like 40 days for it to actually grow on agar plates. So it's not a great test if you want a good turnaround time for your results. So instead, what we do now, what we can do is a real-time PCR. So for that, we actually just extract the DNA out of the bacteria, and then we amplify that up so that we can detect it. And then that's a much quicker way of determining whether there is bacteria present in the feces or not. So what we offer at LIC is, and I'm sure most of you have heard about it already, we do have a herd test milk test for Yonis disease. And this is an antibody test, so that's using the ELISA that I talked about before. And it's a very convenient way of screening your whole herd. So, you don't have to do anything. Basically, you do your normal herd test, the samples come through from the farm, they go through the herd testing, you get your somatic cells and all your milk composition data. And then once they're finished with that, the samples come through to the animal health lab. And that's when we do our ELISA test, and then we'll report those results out. So this is a product that you book through your vet because it's all part of your Yonis management plan. So you need to work with your vet on how you're going to work through those results in the end. And the turnaround time for that is up to 7 working days. So peak time at the moment, and we are sitting around that sort of 5 or 6 days for turnaround time. But that's just because we have so many samples coming through the lab. But it's also $4.75 per sample, just so you know. On the right there is an example of the report that you will get, and I've cut out the bit, there's little bits in the middle I've cut out, but that would be where you'd have your own farm details, etc. And then you get a results summary, which indicates how many cows are high positive, positive or suspect. And then right down the very end, when you get your report, if you scroll right down to the bottom, that's where you have the test interpretation, which I've shown here. But this is just will tell you what it means if the animal comes back. No antibody detected, suspect, or a positive result. I'm just going to put up a little table because we did do some farm trials last season just to look at how the milk test compares with the blood test, and also with the amount of bacteria or whether we can find the bacteria in the feces of those animals. And so when we give a high positive result on the milk test, what we found is that 99% of the animals with that result would also come back as positive. And then of those, 63% came back as being positive, so having the MAP bacteria in their feces. So that 99%, so the 1% that didn't, sometimes it could be due to an ID issue, a discrepancy between the ID on the herd test milk and the actual when the sample was collected from the animal, the blood sample was collected. So that's something to keep in mind as well, as if you are doing any animal health tests on your herd test milk, it's really, really important to make sure that those IDs are 100% correct, because you're going to be making your on-farm decisions based on those. So something to think about. The positive animals or positive milk result, so those tended to be a bit less, so 88% came back as positive on blood. And of those, 26% are shedding the bacteria. So one thing to think about the shedding, and I should have mentioned this earlier, is that you do get fluctuations as well from day to day, how much bacteria is actually released in the feces. So if you go on a particular day, you might find it, and the next day you may not. So it's very intermittent shedding. So it's something to think about if you are doing that fecal test and having a look to see if the bacteria are present. Just because it's not there doesn't mean that that animal is negative. Similarly with the antibodies, you can also get fluctuations with that as well. So just because you might not detect it on one day doesn't mean that they won't go on to be positive, in a week or 2 weeks' time. It's definitely a disease where you have to keep checking. It's not that you can just get a lifetime status as being negative. You have to actually keep testing your animals, because they may become positive over time if they have been infected as calves. So the suspect category for the milk, again, there's a bit less of those that came back as positive on the blood, but 72% were. So it's definitely worth not, forgetting about that suspect group. So it is worth getting them blood tested, because some of those are definitely Yonis positive, and some of them are shedding. So 30% of those were actually found to be shedding the bacteria. So don't sort of disregard them and think I'll just leave those. It's worth talking to your vet about how you might manage those ones as well on farm if you can't remove them. So yeah, again, one of the reasons why they may not get 100% positive on blood test is with the herd test milk as well. There is that risk of getting a little bit of carryover contamination. This can happen just because of the residual milk in the bale. So that's why as well, you may get a few suspects that come up that are actually negative for now, for Yonis disease at least. So keep that in mind as well, but it's worth testing them. So the other test that we can do, obviously, is the blood samples. So as I mentioned before, this goes through the same testing process, except we can do this a little bit quicker because we don't have to wait for it to go through herd testing as well. So the samples pretty much come straight into the animal health lab, and then we'll test those on the ELISA test. And this season, and probably going forward as well, we are offering a free of charge test for any animals that have a positive milk result. So if you get the results back and some of them are high positive, you can collect blood samples from those animals and send those in, and there's no cost associated with that test. And if you want to test your positive or your suspect animals, which is actually a really, really good idea, because as I showed before, a lot of those are actually shedding. There's a cost for those ones. They're $15.80 per sample. And one other important thing to note is that testing your cows for Yonis disease doesn't impact on your ability to export. Obviously, with the news that's coming out recently, that's all going to change anyway. But for now, if you are wanting to export animals, we get a lot of comments saying, "Well, I don't want to do a test because then I won't be able to export them." But that's actually not the case. So with the herd test milk test, or even with the blood test, what you're doing is identifying subclinical cows. So if export is the issue, you'd actually have to have the vet sign off that you've had a clinical case on farm. If that happened, then you wouldn't be able to export. So actually doing this testing actually will help you, because you will be removing animals before they become clinical. So that won't affect your ability to export. So something to keep in mind. So that's all the individual testing that we offer, but we also get a lot of questions back from vets and from farmers saying, is there like a bulk milk test, or how can I quickly test my farm just to see if I have Yonis disease? Or perhaps even, I've brought in some cows, how do I check whether I've brought Yonis disease onto my farm? And so these questions led us down a path of trying to determine how we can do a herd level screen for Yonis disease. And Brendan's already touched on this because he was one of the trial farms that was involved. And this research has actually been going for many years. And so what we were doing was basically getting effluent samples from farms that either had Yonis disease or didn't think they had Yonis disease. And we were using our PCR test to try and detect the bacteria in the effluent. And so that's, again, like looking for the DNA of the bacteria and amplifying it up. And what we found is that our PCR test we have, is definitely sensitive enough to be able to detect the bacteria in effluent. The only problem is we were struggling with the levels, so it wasn't a great indicator of prevalence. On Brendan's farm, it actually worked really well, but that wasn't always the case on some farms, and that's because sometimes you can have a super shedder, so an animal shedding a huge amount of bacteria, and so the level in effluent can be really high, but there's actually not that many cows that are positive by antibody test. In contrast, you could have a farm where there's just sort of a low level of shedding through a whole lot of antibody positive cows. So it's not, we found that it wasn't across all farms a great indicator of prevalence. So despite not being able to do the levels, it was a great way to indicate whether you have Yonis disease on farm. So that's why we decided to go ahead with a commercial release of our new effluent. And we are doing that this season. And what it will do is give you a detected or a not detected result. Basically, if you're not sure if you've got Yonis on your farm, what you can do is send in 4 solid effluent samples, so from somewhere around in your effluent system, and we will test those, and then we'll give you a result to say whether you've got Yonis on farm or not. We can supply the sample pack and the vials, and that comes with all the instructions on best place to collect. So that's $3.50 for the sample pack, and then the price for the testing is $195. And this season, because it's our first season doing it, the turnaround time will be up to 10 working days, just to give the lab team some time to get their head around this new test. But we've had a few samples coming in so far, and we've had a pretty good hit rate so far that most people, as expected, have got Yonis on farm. So it's been interesting, and definitely, as Tracy said, the prevalence is quite high, so we do expect to see a lot of positive samples coming in. So there's obviously lots of different testing. Some you can book through your vet. Or the herd test milk you can book through your vet. The Yonis effluent test, if you want to do that, then you can either book through your vet or you can order those sample packs yourself. So you can do either. And if you have any questions or you want to find out about how to book in for any of these, then we have a team of advisors who will be able to answer any questions you may have. So your phone number is on there, so 0800 436 362, or you can email them at testyourcows@lic.co.nz. And they'll also be able to send out information sheets, anything that you're interested in. So I think that's pretty much, I've covered everything on that slide. So I think that's it from me.